Before I start my story, I would like to say that I'm about 6 feet and 3 inches tall, and this took place during the middle of summer in 2015. I had recently landed a position in field sales, and I couldn't be more happy with it. The money is great, and the company I worked for even gave me a company vehicle. The only downside to the job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and could at times end up with me driving across several states, and the people I work for sometimes expect me to drive to most of my customers. I was grateful, however, since not that many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. After a couple of weeks of getting the hang of things, I had gotten a business call from a clinic in northwestern Florida that wanted me to come and provide a demonstration of our product. I told them that I'd be there by noon the next day. This drive would take me straight down the middle of Alabama on Interstate 65 and then bring me through Alabama State Route 113 down to Florida. I planned to get there by 11 p.m. the night before. Once I got past Montgomery, it was almost 9:30, so it was already dark. I have experience with driving long distances during the night, so the fact that it was night didn't really bother me. Once I saw the exit sign for Flomaton, I took the exit. I had just noticed that it was already 10 p.m., so I stopped at a gas station and bought myself an energy drink so that I would arrive at my destination on time. Once I had gotten back on the road, I realized this drive was going to bring me through the middle of nowhere. After about 25 minutes of driving past farms, fields, and small towns, I arrived at another small town, and I stopped at a McDonald's to stretch my legs. Once I got back onto the road and headed south, I noticed a sign. The sign read, "Farm Machinery and Deer Crossing." Crap, another long drive through the middle of nowhere. After about 10 minutes or so, I noticed that my car was running low on gas. After a couple of minutes, I was just praying that I wouldn't be stuck on a country highway in the middle of the night, because it didn't look like there was going to be a gas station anytime soon. As I was driving down the country highway, I tried to use as little gas as possible. Just when my car was about to completely run out of gas, I saw a small gas station barely a quarter mile away. I pulled up, and I noticed that this gas station was pretty run down and there were no cars at all around it. When I started to think this place wasn't open, I found out that the fill-up tanks were. Once the car was filled up, I was looking at my phone when I heard a sudden but barely noticeable sound on top of the gas station roof. I then looked up, being really quiet to try and hear the sound again. Nothing. Everything was silent. Thinking it was probably nothing and I'm probably just tired from driving so long, I decided to just stop driving for the night and sleep in my car. I looked at my phone for a bit and then fell asleep. I was out for a good hour or so, but I woke up to the same noise again in the same place. This time, I went outside my car to investigate. That was a big mistake. I went to the road so that I could see the roof better, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw a huge, man-like figure crouching on the roof. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" I called out. The thing then suddenly stood up. It locked eyes with me, and then let out this huge, ear-piercing screech, which I remember clearly to this day. The next thing I remember, it jumped down, and I was amazed by how tall the thing was. Based by how tall I am, this thing seemed to be over 8 feet tall. It then ran, inhumanly fast, into the woods. I know after seeing this thing that this was no skunk ape, but something worse. I as well ran as fast as I could back to the car and got out of there as soon as possible. My heart was beating so fast it could have popped out of my chest at any moment. God knows what that thing could have done to me if I was still sleeping. Once I got to the nearest town, I got a hotel room and tried to calm myself down. I stayed awake all night and then drove down to where I needed to be. A couple of months after my encounter, I remember watching this TV show about mysterious creatures in America. I remember seeing this part about a mysterious creature that matched the description of what I saw that night. Honestly, I still have nightmares about what I saw. That experience has now made me scared of driving through country highways at night. And whenever I go to a gas station after it's gotten dark, I make sure there are at least 1 or 2 cars there already. This is a short but terrifyingly true experience that occurred when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I grew up on a Navajo reservation in Utah. Often, the older guys would go out to a nearby bluff to camp out. I was never allowed to go with them. They were grown-ups, my mother told me. I was just too young. But the older I grew, the more I wanted to go with them. So, one night, I snuck out and followed them out there. It was maybe a 30-minute walk out, and it took everything I had to be quiet enough to not get caught. After an excruciating walk, we made it to the bluff. It was beautiful at night. I had never been there after dark. There had to have been thousands of stars in the sky. It's crazy how different and beautiful everything seemed to be, merely half an hour away from my home. Well, now that I was there and the guys were setting up camp, I honestly had no idea what I was going to do. I never thought about it. Did I really expect to just wait out there all night and sleep in the nearby woods? So I decided, once they settled in, I'd make myself known and face the repercussions in the morning. I heard a twig snap behind me. My heart pounded, and I turned to face whatever was there. It was my older brother. I wanted to... I stammered for an excuse. He shushed me, with a weird smile on his face. I turned back toward the group in front of me. My brother's friends were putting together a campfire, and my brother was pitching the... Wait. My older brother was setting up the tent, but he was also behind me? I immediately turned around. My brother, no, this impersonator, was now beside me, standing over the bushes as if he didn't care if the others saw him. He stared at the campsite. I was too afraid to move or scream. I sat there waiting and hoping this thing would go away. He was so close. Who knows what might have happened if I would have yelled for my real brother. I don't know why I glanced at his feet, but that's when I couldn't help but jump backward, away from the demon before me. He didn't have feet. He had hooves like a goat. I had heard stories of skinwalkers, even stories of the goat man. I thought they were just that, stories. But that night on my back on the ground, tears welling up in my eyes, I stared at a being that wasn't my brother. Nor was it human. I got up and ran harder than I thought I could, not caring whether that thing chased me or not. I ran until I gripped my older brother's waist in a tight hug. I could feel the guy's eyes on me, but at least I was away from that thing. They knew I was scared. I could hear them asking me why I was crying instead of wondering why I wasn't at home. They drove me home that night and never ratted me out. I never spoke of that night, not even with my brother. No one would believe me anyway. But even so, after all these years, I still can't help but wince whenever my brother smiles at me. This incident took place in the spring of 2005 on a road called Spooks Hill Road. Go figure. The road borders a reservoir and gets relatively deep into the woods. At the time, I was 17 and riding my motorcycle back from my friend's place. It was the time of day where the sun had already set, but it wasn't quite nighttime yet. The sky was a dark blue and the woods were pitch black. I think it's called twilight. I was on a sport bike and thoroughly enjoying the twisty nature of the road, fairly in excess of the posted 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. I had my high beams on to see further through the turns and came upon a wider right turn in the road, with the guardrail on the inside of the turn. The reservoir was also on the right side of the road, but there were a few hundred feet of woods between it and the road. As I came upon the apex of the turn, I was a few feet away from the guardrail, and saw what I can only describe as a 6 or 8-year-old girl on the outside of the guardrail. She wasn't illuminated per se, but the headlight definitely made her white clothing light up. She appeared to be wearing a gown of sorts, almost like one of those old-timey nightgowns. Her hands were on the guardrail, and I saw her head follow me as I went by. I was probably going 50 or so at the time, so I didn't have much time to look at her. But what stuck out the most was she had no face. There was just black there. The closest image of what her face looked like was the thing from the Muppets Christmas Carol. The hairs on my neck stood up so fast that it stung. As soon as I was able to, I slowed to a stop. The rational part of my brain told me there might be a young girl lost in the woods. The primal part of my brain was telling me to get the hell out of there. I had gone too far past the turn to see the apex where she was, so I turned around. I slowly went by the turn, looking at the spot where she had been, and saw nothing. No one. Then I tried to reproduce the incident by going by that fast again, hoping it was some sort of optical illusion with the headlight. Still, nothing where she was. After the incident, I rode home. There, I told my grandmother about the incident and how thoroughly creeped out I was. My grandmother, a super religious lady, said she believes it may have been my guardian angel and that its appearance forced me to slow down, possibly preventing me from hitting a deer or something. I'm not very spiritual at all, but it is a nice perspective on something that was truly creepy and hard to explain. It happened a few months ago in January. It was Saturday, and that meant anime night. We heard some barks and yipping, but we thought nothing of it. It was just my older sister and I, and we didn't give much attention to it because we lived out in a wooded area. My sister, Kara, had just announced we should get going after all, and it was dark. So we got our things ready to go as we were walking to my grandmother's house to stay the night and watch anime. Being a bit lazy as Kara and I were leaving the house, we decided to jump the fence. It was locked to keep my dogs in, and we just didn't want to untie and tie it back up once we got through. So, we continued on our walk to our grandmother's house. On the way, we pointed out a few constellations, Scorpio being the first to be pointed out. We stood there, looking at the stars for a moment. A sudden scurrying happened behind us. I wasn't scared, and I passed it off as a stray cat. Kara and I walked a little bit longer until we reached the trail leading to the house. We then heard a very disturbing sound coming from the trees around us. It was a growl, to say the least. It didn't sound anything like the wildlife we had around here, and it certainly was a large animal. My sister ran off, and I mean she took off. I had never seen my sister take off like that. I definitely never saw her so spooked. I fell behind, slipping in a bit of mud from the melting snow before I could catch up to her. When we reached our grandmother's porch, we were out of breath, and we tried to calm ourselves. We didn't want to give Grandma a heart attack. She's a very caring woman. I could hear her slowly make her way to the door. But I was tempted, and I turned back, and I caught a glimpse of the thing in the trail. It was huge, with long gray hair, and I would say almost human, but yet not even close. Its head was canine like a large dog, standing upright. Its eyes will always haunt me, something I will never forget. They were the oddest eyes I had ever seen, with human intelligence, like it was smarter than a large dog, and the moonlight reflected so brightly off of them. I was stuck in some sort of trance. It was gone as suddenly as it came, and I was pulled out of it when my sister pulled me inside. She locked the door quickly, and I didn't utter a word of what I saw to her. Even though she was spooked, I doubt she would believe a word of it. I haven't told this story to anyone, in fact, and I know what I saw. That creature, that thing, it was no dog. Whatever it was supernatural, and it was terrifying.
Growing up a fisherman, we spend a hell of a lot of time out on the water. Ever since I could remember, my dad took me out on the water at this lake near my childhood home every weekend. It was beautiful. It was so still. Rolling mountains on either side. Whether I caught something or not, just being able to let the water rock our boat while I looked up at the sky made everything worth it. There is one experience, though, that made me hesitant to go back on the water for a while. It was a gorgeous spring day. The temperature wasn't too hot. I'd say it was an absolutely perfect day to go fishing. My dad and I packed up our tackle boxes and poles and headed out in his single-cab Ford. The 20-minute drive was filled with conversations about the biggest bass and catfish my dad had ever caught, the ones that got away, and the girlfriends he had as a rambunctious teenager. When we arrived, surprisingly, there was no one else there. No other trucks or vehicles in the lot or gravel, no boats making waves out on the water. Nobody around. Lucky us. It was too good to be true, especially on a day like that. We got the boat in the water as soon as possible. Before I knew it, Dad was on the trolling motor searching for a nice, lively spot along the banks. We tried out a few spots, each looking pretty promising. The bugs were flying all over the logs and tree roots that had dipped into the water by the banks. Staying put and fishing for about 30 minutes at each spot, we came up empty-handed each and every time. This was odd, to say the least. We never even saw a fish, snake, or turtle coming up out of the water or snapping at the insects. We tried a couple more spots, and still there was nothing. I could tell Dad wanted to call it quits. The day was warming up more than he thought it would, and both of us were starting to get pretty sweaty. It was tempting to jump in the water and cool off. I'm glad I didn't. Not a moment later, I noticed a large, inky blackness in the water in the middle of the lake. It had to be about 50 or so yards away from us. Dad, I pointed at it. Do you see that? He nodded. We were both thinking the same thing, a shit ton of fish all flocking to the center of the lake. I don't know why they were out there, but this was our ticket to a big payday. Dad accelerated us out quickly, then killed the motor about halfway there so that we weren't right on top of them and being loud as possible. Eventually, we were almost right over the shadowy mass. Those weren't fish. That wasn't fish. The whole thing moved as if it was one mind, one being. The edges tapered off into longer, thin pieces. I honestly had no idea what I was looking at. I was already starting to freak out. What is that? I breathed to nobody in particular. Fuck if I know, my dad said under his breath. We watched as the mass got darker and bigger. The thing started to rise. And there we were, hovering right over it. Dad, go! I couldn't help but scream. He was already on the motor as soon as he saw that thing coming up. He sped the boat out of there as fast as he could. He was headed toward the dock. It was a mile down where we had originally got in the water. That was too far away. The black mass was still coming up. It must have been unbelievably huge. It had to have been 30 or 40 yards in diameter, not to mention it was coming right at us. There was no way we could make it back to the loading area. Dad must have figured the same. He turned a hard right, toward the bank closest to us. I don't think he cared if we crashed right into it. Whatever got us out of the water, I guess. We were maybe 15 feet away when the boat flew out from under us. I was underwater for a few seconds. I swam to the top as quickly as possible. My dad was climbing up on the shore and the boat was capsized going underwater. When I looked down, all I could see was blackness. That thing, it was all around me, swallowing up the water and damn near the edge of the bank. I swam for my life, kicking and screaming and hoping against hope that that big black thing didn't swallow me whole. As soon as I felt solid ground, I yanked myself up and I ran. My dad was already up there waiting for me. He held onto me and we both watched as our boat disappeared into the dark mass. We walked back to the truck, shaky as hell, wondering exactly what we might have seen that day. It took us nearly a year to gather up the courage just to drive back out there. People come and go from that place 100 times a day, and never have I heard anyone speak of something like what we saw. I am so glad I made it back to dry land in time. I must confess that this story did not happen to me, but it did indeed happen to my father. In fact, this, like many other stories that I have heard, happened before I was born. We were very poor, and one hot summer night, my dad decided to take my older brother Michael, who was about 4 or 5 at the time, to walk down the dirt road by our house. Being poor, we did not have air conditioning, so on hot summer nights we had to open all the doors and windows to cool down. My uncle Lonnie was also staying with us at the time and had joined my dad on his walk. We had a few blue tick hounds that Dad also took with him for protection from snakes and such. The dirt road by our house was known by everyone as the Creek Road, since it dead ended on a creek bank. As they walked, the moon was full and high in the sky, with an ominous glow to it. The dogs ran around sniffing and doing their business, as my dad and uncle, Lonnie, clutched my brother's hands as they went along. This dirt road was about a mile long, with forests on both sides. Once they were halfway down, there was a clearing there covered in broom sage. Strange as it sounds, the broom sage was glowing a strange and eerie glow. At that point, my dad decided to inspect it, to see if he could find out what was causing that glow. As he reached the middle, something very tall and dark, with glowing red eyes, stood up out of the broom sage. Now, my dad was 6 feet tall and a stocky man, but this thing was twice his height and double the mass. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked back slowly to my brother and uncle. Once there, they began running back home, tossing my brother back and forth to one another like a football as they ran. My mom said that the dogs had already beaten them home and were under the house whining with fright from what they had just witnessed. Soon my dad, brother, and uncle returned home, exhausted and shaken by what they encountered. My mother, being the skeptic she was, did not believe the story they had told, simply because it was too fantastic and was something she would have to have seen herself. I recently moved up north. I'd rather not say where. I will tell you that it snows every other day there. The snow is rarely ever catastrophic unless there's a blizzard. So long as you get a decent weather ice truck, you can still get around. Toward the end of 2015, a blizzard did come through. It wasn't anything record-breaking, but it was enough to trap me inside my home for about a week. God, what a week that was. The week started fine. I was ready for a bit of a vacation. Obviously, I couldn't get to work if I couldn't even open my front door, so I was planning on enjoying myself. Being lazy, probably just playing games and watching movies. A day or two in, I must have fallen asleep on my couch. Kinda hard not to, with a space heater right next to me. I was jolted awake by a loud thump. Half asleep, I sat up and looked around, wondering what in the hell fell down that might have made that noise. Then I heard more thumping. It was quieter than before, but I could hear it plain as day. Someone was walking around on my roof. At first, I thought it was a squirrel that had jumped down from a tree, but these footsteps sounded heavier. I went upstairs to grab my gun, just in case, but midway up the staircase, the noises stopped. I calmed down a little bit, then went back downstairs for a while. Nestling back into my warm spot on the couch, I quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, I got a snack from the fridge and decided to head up to my room upstairs and hop on the treadmill, after choking down the snack, of course. I noticed as I stepped onto the second floor, it was freezing cold. I could feel a breeze. I opened my bedroom door to see the sliding glass door to the balcony, wide open. Worst of all, there were tracks in my room. Huge tracks from a clawed animal. It looked like there were 4 toes and paw pads. Now that I was actually paying attention, I could see the tracks enter the hallway and onto the staircase. At this point, they had completely melted away. I stood there at the top of the staircase, wondering what the hell was inside my house. I was wondering and hoping that it wasn't still there. I ran back to my room, grabbed my gun and locked the door. I started to shut and lock the glass door, but the thought of possibly trapping myself inside with a wild animal scared the hell out of me. I kept it open. For an hour, I just sit on the edge of my bed, hoping that it really was just a big-ass squirrel that got curious and wandered inside. Eventually, the sun set and night fell. Nothing happened. I get up and walked over to the balcony. It was way too cold to keep it open any longer. Before I shut it, though, I stepped out and looked over the railing. I don't know why I did, but what I saw below me I will never forget. There was something walking around by my house. It stood over the top of my windows, which had to have been 7 or 8 feet tall. It walked quietly, like it was looking for something. It would stop at the windows as if it was peering inside. The light was still on from my living room, and I can make out the details of its face. It was covered in scruffy fur like a mangy dog, and it even had the snout of one. Just looking at the thing scared the fuck out of me. I had my rifle on me, but I was not about to accidentally miss and get that thing's attention. So I just stood there, freezing and watching. The creature had continued to stalk around that side of the house, leaving deep tracks in the snow that perfectly matched the ones I had seen in my house earlier. Then it started clawing on the walls. It was louder than I would have expected. After a few minutes of this, it turned toward the forest and walked off. I was relieved and fucking terrified at the same time. At least the fucking thing was gone. I stepped back inside and was about to shut the sliding glass door when something pushed me hard. It was from behind me. I fell in the snow on the balcony and turned toward my attacker as fast as I possibly could. Another one of those things was on the ground. It wrestled with its long, gangly limbs to stand up, and once it did, it charged toward me. It leapt over me and over the balcony railing. I stood up fast and looked below. The damn thing was tossing its legs around again, trying to get back up after its fall. It then got up and ran blindingly fast back into the woods. Holy shit. I ran inside and locked the doors. I turned on every light and shut every curtain. Fuck that. I didn't want to see another one of those damned things. I don't know if they were simply looking for a place to get warm, or if they were hungry. But I'm lucky to be alive. What scares me the most is the fact that I went back to sleep after having that thing enter my house. I slept, unconscious, out in the open, while a colossal, werewolf-looking creature walked around my home, probably starving. How close did it get to me that night? This is the first time I've ever seen anything out of the ordinary, and it is by far the most horrifying moment of my life. I used to go hiking on a trail near my home in Tennessee. We lived out in the boondocks, so I was pretty used to the woods. I would always go out for a walk with my basset hound, Flash, every evening. But just the other day was the first time I've ever seen Flash growl and yelp the way he did. We were coming around a bend right next to a small pond that was completely overgrown with thin trees. Suddenly, Flash started growling and barking his head off. I looked to where he was facing, but I couldn't see anything. I kept walking, but he wouldn't follow. Then he started yelping as if someone had kicked him in the gut. Just the sound of him panicking freaked me out enough to back up a bit. That's when I heard something crashing through the woods ahead of us, along with the most foul smell I've ever smelled. It smelled like death and vomit. I stood close to Flash and started backing up when something broke through the thick foliage ahead of us. I had never seen anything like this creature before, and it all happened so fast. so I'll do my best to explain what it looked like. It was the shape of a large dog, with really long fur, as if the thing had never been groomed. Even the snout protruded outward like a canine, but there were sharp fangs hanging from its maw on either side. Weirdest of all, though, there were antlers on its head. The thing honestly looked like a carnivorous rabid deer, except this thing was far too bulky and short to be a deer. I took off toward my home full speed, glancing behind me as I ran. After the third or fourth glance, the thing must have run off as well, because I could no longer see it. But I didn't slow down. For all I knew, that thing could have been stalking me. I didn't stop to catch my breath until I was home with every door locked. I haven't seen anything since then, and hope I never do. I just really miss going on walks.
I used to live in an area right between two towns in Wisconsin near Hudson, and directly next to a pheasant hunting marsh. My mom's decision, since she wanted to live away from the sounds of the busy town. My house, a duplex, was cradled between the marsh to the right, a cornfield in the front, and to the right a steep hill covered in forest. After a few tries of hoisting myself up the side of the steep hill, with trees all around, I found my way up by circling the side of the hill to the top. Still very steep, but easier than scaling any of the sides. Climbing up the side, I still would cut myself somewhat on the thorns, and my downstairs neighbor warned me several times to stay out of the woods. But, being a teenager, I always ignored him. It seemed peaceful and calm at the top, which is why I often went up there to enjoy the lush flowers and take in the sunlight. Yet there was one spot I was often curious about, that I couldn't get to. It was on the very edge of one of the steepest parts of the hill. It seemed to dip inside like some sort of cave. I was always too scared to get too close to the edge. I might have fallen over and gotten stuck or broke a limb and get the wrath of my mother, who couldn't afford a hospital visit. One evening, I went through hell during the day with my family, leaving me running out of the door bawling. I had no clue where I was going. I just knew I didn't want to be in that house. I looked to the hill. Though I never went there unless it was day, I made my way up, ignoring the mews of the outdoor cats who demanded my attention. On my way up, stumbling a bit through my tears, I remembered cutting myself several times on thorns. When I finally reached the top, I breathed heavily as normal. I moved around, mopey, crying like a baby, until I heard a grumble, maybe some sort of growl. Either way, it sent shivers down my spine, and it put knots in my stomach. I turned to the dig in the hill that I had always been curious about. Something slim and blurred by my tears stood up and started slowly turning toward me. Before it could, I turned to my house, and as the terrified 15-year-old I was, I went running down the almost 90-degree angle that was the side of the hill. Stumbling through panic and tears, I tried to catch myself on a tree that I remembered using before to pull me up to the hill the first few times. Not even a sound, as if it slipped out of the ground. The large tree falls and slides down the hill with me, cutting up my legs and scaring the horse just outside of the woods. I got up as quickly as I could. The cats were nowhere in sight as I made my way into the house. All that night, I felt uncomfortable and scared. The sound of the horse being jumpy all night, and no sight of the cats who normally slept on our steps all night. For the next week, I tried to rationalize and make up excuses for what I had seen. A day or two later, I think about the flowers all over the hill, how for some reason I want to see them again. I decided to invite my friend to go with me. I didn't tell him what I had seen. I just invited him to see the flowers. When he arrived, for some time, I put off going up until he insisted that we do before it gets dark. So we made our way up the hill. The entire time, I stared at the dip instead of my surroundings. If I did, I would have noticed before we got there. When we made it to the top, I finally looked around. The once beautifully green area with flowers and lush trees was dead. The grass, the flowers, even the trees, it was all dead. You could easily push over any tree now. They were all now rotted at the roots. The trees I could climb before, it was only a week before that I could do it. They were easily knocked over with a push like the tree I had caught myself on. Since then, I have never gone back. We moved into the nearby town, and since then my family has been getting much better. Living there, my family had screaming matches almost every night. The cats would stare at the woods, and at night they would hide under our blankets. And after leaving there, almost no screaming has happened. The cats are always out and about, too. I have only told a few friends of this story, and they have begged me to take them to the hill so they can conduct paranormal research. But even though I'd like to see those white flowers again, I am scared of what else I might find. This happened during my freshman year in college, almost exactly 4 years ago. My friend Haley and I used to smoke together at night after a long day of studying. We had a beautiful campus, so we'd always just roam around and chat while we smoked. Our friends found this little abandoned shack thing that we used to call a half-a-house on our campus. It apparently used to be part of a building, and this one specific room was never fully torn down, so it only had 3 standing walls. The walls were made of wood, and since it was so old, some of the wooden slats had fallen out, leaving gaps in the walls. We met up around midnight and decided to go over to the half-a-house, where we had many times been before, to go smoke. We were hanging out there for about 10 minutes or so, when we started to hear rustling in the leaves coming from the opposite side of the wall. It sounded like it was maybe 10 yards away from us. We thought somebody was coming and didn't want to be found smoking, so we hushed our voices and listened to the sound of someone walking around back there. The rustling stopped, but then we heard it jumping, and we could tell it was coming closer and closer to us. It was still on the other side of the wall, so we couldn't see what it was at first. But then we saw this thing push itself through one of the missing slats and toward us. The only lighting we had at the time was the moon, which backlit the creature, so we couldn't make out its features, just its overall shape and size. It stood at maybe 1.5 feet tall and was totally human-shaped, but extremely scrawny. It had a head perhaps the size of a baseball, a neck and 2 arms that it used to push itself through the hole in the wall and toward us. Its upper arms looked to be maybe the circumference of my wrist. Based on the shape of its upper body, it very clearly was not a raccoon, not a cat or dog. It was something unnatural. The second we saw that thing climbing in toward us, Haley and I ran away from it and back to our dorm as fast as we possibly could. We still have absolutely no explanation for it. I was hanging out with her just this past weekend and brought it up, and she said either it was a person who was messing with us, or we saw something supernatural that night. I really don't think it was human, because even dwarves and midgets don't stand at only 18 inches tall, and they can't be that impossibly scrawny. And what would they have been doing, jumping around in basically the woods in the middle of the night? I managed to find a picture of that shack online. I think this picture was taken before the incident, so it looked a little different from this when we were there. See the window on the wall that we're facing? Underneath the window is where the wooden boards had fallen out, that the creature pushed itself through. For Calv students trying to check it out, last time I looked for the shack, I couldn't find it. So either my memory escaped me and I couldn't find it in the right spot, or it has since been torn down. I have been a scout since I was very little, and I really enjoyed our summer camps, but this year was different. I was finally old enough to join the Night Guard Rota. I was 11 or 12. I do not remember exactly, but I knew I was ready. The task was simple. The member of your rota will come to wake you up when it was your time to switch off, and you would guard the camp for 1.5 hours. Then you will wake up another member who will switch off with you. It's 2 a.m. and my friend wakes me up from my shift. I was super excited. I was alone, sitting in the middle of the camp. The night was calm, and the sky was clear. Beautiful stars were sparkling above my head, and a light summer breeze was playing with my hair. The time was passing fast. I was sitting very close to the fire so I could catch some light for reading my old comic. Right when I turned a page, I heard some rustling noise. I looked up immediately, but I saw nothing. I thought maybe some leaves fell, so I didn't pay much attention. I returned back to reading, but then I could hear some weird growling, very clear. My heartbeat picked up. I could hear it in my head. The growling was coming from the camp. I took my flashlight and went to check it out, even though I would rather stay by the safety of the fire. I was getting very close to it. Step by step, the growling was getting louder. A weird thing was that it was not moving. It was coming from our leader's tent. It was only our leader snoring. I felt so silly for being so paranoid. I got back to the fire and I sat down. I had only 20 more minutes left. Everything was going smooth. I had a really ominous feeling. The weird noise and the growling, or snoring, it got me in a mood. I had a feeling like someone was watching me, or maybe something. I could feel the pointy eyes on my back, but when I tried to stare in the distance, I saw only darkness. But then, very strong wind came up and blew my comic right to the direction where I thought the watcher would be. I did not want to go to get it. It was only 5 meters away, but the wind blew even harder, and I couldn't see my comic anymore. There was simply no way I could get up and get it. I heard a few steps more to the right. What if there is someone, or a boar, or maybe just a fox or something? I was so scared. I decided to cheat, and I moved the time on the watch I was sharing with my rota, and went to wake up another member. I went to sleep, or at least tried to. The growling, the snoring became so loud. But this growling was different than what it was before. The main thing was it was moving, and it was very close to my tent. And I could hear it. I could even feel it a few steps away. But a few moments after that, it was gone. Silence. In the morning, when I woke up, I found the comic next to my tent, and it was missing a few pages. It looked like it had been chewed. I didn't tell anyone about this experience. It has been more than 10 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. Some friends and I, back in 1998, had decided to stay in my best friend Nick's parents' cabin for the weekend. If I recall correctly, the place was somewhere on the east edge of Washington. Snow was pouring down the whole weekend. There were 5 of us in all: me, Nick, Timothy, Julie, and Erica. That Saturday morning, the morning after we had arrived, the 2 guys decided to do some skiing, though, personally, I don't think the snow was anywhere thick enough to do skiing of any sort. The rest of us decided to play with an old Ouija board Nick's parents had hidden away. The thing was so dusty, but everything seemed to be in working order. Erica decided it would be even more fun if we turned out all the lights and lit some candles. So, we did. It was pretty creepy, but that's the fun of it. We didn't have one of those planchette things, so we used a small shot glass. And no, none of us had been drinking. First off, we asked if there were any spirits around. Nothing. We waited about a minute, but nothing happened. Then, we asked if there were any beings here besides us. And again, after waiting for a minute or two, there was no answer. Maybe we didn't set it up right, Erica said. What do you mean? I asked. She gave me this awkward smile. I recognized that smile. She always had it when she had a bad idea. A good idea to her, but generally a bad idea. It made me feel a bit uneasy. She answered, "We've got candles, now let's make a blood pact." "What the hell, Erica?" Julie wasn't happy with her suggestion. "What do you mean, pact?" I was curious, I must admit. "Let's put our blood on the board," she explained. "You know, make it more spiritual. I bet you something will answer." It sounded spooky, and I've always been a fanatic for all things creepy, so I agreed to it. Julie, however, was having none of it. Erica and I pricked our fingers with a pen and tried to let the blood drip on the board. We ended up just wiping it on there a bit. I was already regretting my decision. The three of us placed our hands back on the shot glass and started again. "Are there any spirits here with us?" we said together in attempted unison. Almost immediately, we felt the shot glass move. All of us jumped back when we felt it. We looked at each other, each silently asking the other, "Are you moving it?" Our blank expressions told us none of us were. We watched very anxiously as the glass rolled over a few letters. N-O-T-H-E-R. In my head, I read "nother" or "nother," and had no idea what that meant. "What do you mean?" Erica suddenly spoke aloud. We felt it move over the same letters, this time pausing between the T and the H. "Not her," I breathed. Erica and I leered at Julie, quickly understanding that it was probably talking about her. She was the only one who hadn't pricked her finger. Julie jerked her hand away from the shot glass with a worried look on her face. "Not her." A raspy whisper came from just outside the cabin. Now, Erica and I both jerked our hands away, too. All of us stood, staring toward the wall where the front door was. "Not her." It came again, somehow closer than before. I could feel goosebumps all over me at that point. Then came the scratching sound at the door. "Nick, stop it!" I screamed. He had played pranks on me before. I guess I just ignored the fact that he wouldn't have known what was spelled out on the Ouija board. So why would he be outside whispering like that? Erica, breaking all the usual horror movie tropes, ran toward the door. I ran after her, Julie whimpering behind us. She pulled the door open. Outside, something pale with crazily long limbs scurried away on all fours. We saw it together for about 2 seconds before it broke into the edge of the woods. The thing was the size of a child, hairless and pale as the snow itself. That's about as much as I saw before it was out of sight. Before I could even think of blaming Nick or Timothy, I saw them, backs against the outside wall toward the corner of the cabin. The fuck was that? Nick was visibly shaken. Timothy just stood there without a word, staring into those woods. We all gathered inside that night, all the lights on and the curtains pulled over the windows. Nick and Timothy explained how they had just gotten back when they saw that pale creature clawing at the front door. They said they wanted to be rational, that this must have been a hairless animal of some sort, but we all doubted that it was anything less than paranormal. I will never again use a Ouija board, and going alone into the woods will forever be out of the picture.
Back in the mid-90s, I would run tree limbs along a long winding road in the backwoods of Kentucky in my old Ford pickup. Growing up there, I heard countless stories of strange things. These stories were usually your typical creature-in-the-woods sightings. But for my 30 years of living there, at the time, not once had I seen anything strange. And believe me, I drove through and worked in the woods on a daily basis. I was so sure that if I was going to see something weird, I would have already seen it. I was dead wrong. We were finishing up loading some tree limbs into my pickup. The last part of the day was packing in the wood and driving it cross-county. I loved it. The scenery was beautiful. I get to listen to my music, and just being alone with my thoughts was nice. That evening, as the sun set above the tree line, I was just passing an old wide pasture. In the distance on the road ahead of me, I could see a large black mound on the side of the road, just next to the barbed wire fence separating the road from the pasture. I slowed down as I got closer. I was in no hurry, and my curiosity got the better of me. As I got closer, the sight of the thing made me a bit nervous. Of course, driving up on the dead body of an animal would make anyone nervous, right? On the side of the road, a black cow lay dead. Its eyes bulged from their sockets as flies repeatedly landed and flew from its cornea. I drove up a little closer. It was a little morbid of me, but I wanted to know what might have killed the thing. There were tufts of fur hanging from some of the barbs on the fence beside it, as if the thing had tried to run through or jump over it. As for the body, I couldn't find any marks or blood. Maybe it died of a heart attack. Maybe something had chased it. Mischievous dogs and coyotes were rampant in these parts after all. I put the truck back in drive. Before I could push down on the accelerator, I heard a thud. My truck suddenly jounced back and forth. Something had fallen into the bed of my pickup. Immediately, I turned toward my back window. The sun had almost completely set by this time, and I couldn't make out much, save for the red-tinted bark of the branches closest to the glass, highlighted ominously by the brake light. I waited, still staring into the bed. I had heard something. Searching with my eyes, I could not find anything out of place. Then, my eyes locked onto something I didn't recognize. It looked like a patch of grass or fur. I could see its follicles catching in the wind. For a moment, I thought it may have been grass and soil we may have pulled up while throwing in the branches. When whatever it was attached to lifted itself up and stood on two legs, I feared for my life. But I could not help but watch in wonder and horror as this thing leaned forward, revealing itself in the faint red brake light. Yes, my foot was on the brake this whole time. In the 3 or so seconds that I watched this thing loom ever closer to my rear window, I made out exactly what I was looking at. The creature, and it was definitely no man. It was covered in dirty, matted fur from head to toe. Its legs didn't bend the way a human's do. They looked bent or twisted at the knees. Toward its upper body, the fur grew thin to the point I could see skin underneath, and its face. Oh God, it made my skin crawl. It looked both human and beast at the same time. All at once, my fear got the best of me. Without looking, I stomped the gas pedal on the floor. The truck took off, and I watched the creature jump out of the bed and land in the middle of the road, unscathed by the sudden acceleration. It just stood there, a silhouette growing dark in the distance. The damn thing had to have been at least 6 feet tall. It towered over the barbed wire fence on the side of the road. I have no idea what happened that night. I can easily tell you that my drives through that area are no longer fun. As I pass through that pasture, I feel like I'm being watched, and I can't help but drive a little faster when I'm in that area. Did that dead cow have anything to do with my experience? I feel like this creature had set me up, like it had laid a trap for me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I wish I never would have stopped. Never have I been so afraid, especially in the place that has been my home all my life. I hope to God I don't break down on that road. When I lived in Nebraska a few years back, I experienced the most terrifying moment of my life, and it was all thanks to that damned window. And our house was situated at the top of a hill with woods on all sides. I'm talking woods only yards away from the outside walls of the house. It was gorgeous, probably the nicest place I had ever lived. But at night, the scenery took on a most sinister vibe. Let's just say those woods are a place you don't want to be when the moon is full. Anyway, my room was at the back of the house. It was a pretty big room with its own bathroom and closet, and a massive window just above my bed. At the time, I enjoyed the window just above me as I slept. The moon was beautiful at night, beaming through the glass. But that peace was all about to change. I woke up from a strange dream in which a weird man had been tapping at the front door and peering at me through the side window. The tapping got louder and louder until it literally pulled me awake. I shook it off and decided I'd get up and grab a glass of water. Picking up a cup I kept on my side table, I walked to the bathroom and ran the faucet. Tap, tap, tap. My heart nearly sank. It was the exact same sound I had heard in my dream only moments before. I quickly turned off the faucet and listened closely. Tap, tap. Instinctually, I turned to that noise, and I regret doing so to this day. I saw a finger on the glass. It was a blur, but I caught a glimpse of pale white wrapping ever so lightly against the surface. It wasn't 5 seconds later before I saw it again. This time I nearly fell to the floor. It was no finger tapping on my window. It was pointed at the end, dirty as well as pale. Not to mention the finger itself was probably 10 inches long. It sounds unbelievable. I wish it didn't actually happen. I wish this was fake. But that's not even the worst of it. I could see condensation on the window where this man or this thing was breathing. Slow, steady, calm, unlike me. But when it pressed its face against the cold glass, I screamed and screamed, letting the glass of water fall from my hands. Seconds after it shattered on the floor, my parents were in my room turning on the lights. The thing at the window was gone, but I was still in tears. I told them what happened. Luckily, my father believed me enough to check outside by my window. I begged him not to go outside, but he headed out anyway. My mother held me in her arms, trying to calm me down. A few minutes later, my dad finally came back. I was relieved until I saw how ghostly white his face was. It wasn't until a few days ago that he told me why he was so afraid that night. That's the reason I'm sharing this now, he told me. But he went outside and could see a chip in the glass that had not been there before. And he found a bony, long, too thin footprint. My family was always in a financial rut, especially after my mother passed and my father moved to New Jersey with me and my sister. If you're familiar, New Jersey property prices aren't as bad as New York's, but their taxes are crazy. That as it is, me and my father always took work, whether it was running a good truck, cleaning some guy's house, or working on the road. Our most common job was truck driving. He got a somewhat stable job from a family friend who owned a trucking company down near Newark. It likely isn't there anymore. He had to relocate after flooding. We would haul shipments of food and metals, deliver truck parts, or even just do something as simple as take it for repairs when the mechanics weren't available. Making $200 for just driving a couple of Mack trucks, it was pretty good work for someone my age. Not to mention my father, who was half crippled, who couldn't even lift himself off the floor if he were to fall. All of this would change, however. We had a job to deliver food supplies to Fort Dix, pretty standard. We ended up delivering more than required, and my father, being the sneak that he was, decided to keep a chest of meat for ourselves. It was about mid-August, near the end of the summer rush for people to come to the shore. This meant a large amount of drunken young folks, families, and even the occasional nudist would flock down the highways like a group of birds, swarming the beaches and boardwalks. This meant an extra buildup of traffic, and thus, more accidents. We listened to the traffic report whenever we made a haul, short or long. It provided us with weather, what routes to avoid, and so on. This is how we knew our usual route was piled up after a drunk driver got behind the wheels of an SUV, plowing into another car, and the domino effect just followed. Luckily, the pileup was pretty small. But for us at the time, it was more than a small nuisance, meeting to plan a detour with the sun setting, already behind schedule. To make it short, after cursing out the tourist on the radio, we decided to simply take the more secluded, rural back roads of the surrounding barrens. This was mostly Bear Swamp, a large nature reserve and hunting area during the deer season. It also had some bear and even bald eagle preservation, but I can assure you, what we saw and heard on that back road, it was no eagle. The detour put us off schedule for about an extra hour and a half, sending us right through the swampy roads, flooded with mud and dirt. Not to mention the pitch-black darkness and having to drive slowly due to deer or coyote running across the road in the pitch-black darkness. I remember joking with my father about going for a swim in the swamp because our AC had broken at the time. "Hey Dad, how's about a dip with those gators?" He said something along the lines of wishing it could feed Saul, the family friend, to the gators for not getting the dang air fixed. The night swamp was oddly mystical looking as I watched it from the open windows. A bright star and the few lightning bugs you could see in the distance. It was a really good scene. Despite what most say of Jersey, it isn't all smokestacks and highway. Something was off, however. Middle of summer, driving past a swamp, normally you would hear the calls of frogs or even an owl in the pines. Granted, our truck engine would be spooking most of the animals, but all the same, this amount of noiselessness was out of place. As I enjoyed the view, my body flung forward against the dashboard as my father slammed on the brakes. He hit the horn at the same time. "What the hell?" I practically shouted at him, my teen voice still cracking. How stupid I must have sounded. Deer on the road. Big sucker, too. Should tell your granddad to come out here next winter. He was plain and simple about it, something I hadn't inherited from him. Pulling myself into my seat, I strained my eyes to see past the darkness, to which I did see a tuft of hair disappearing from our headlights, flicking like that of a cat's tail. Oddly, it was dark from what I could see. The fur was blackish ginger instead of the usual brown or white a deer would have. Its length was off as well. If I could guess, I'd say it was a good 5 inches long. About another 20 minutes later, we had made it deeper into the wooded area, passing the farmland and meeting the old cabins and hillbilly hotels that scattered the woods like buckshot. It wasn't like a suburban cul-de-sac in the middle of the woods. These houses were spaced out a good 15 minutes from each other, if not more. As we were making our way down the long, winding path, praying not to get shot by some crazed redneck, who we may have awakened from a deep sleep, it hit us. And literally, a loud snapping noise like a metallic bang as something landed on top of the truck. First, we imagined it was just a tree limb hitting the top of the truck. Being quite tall, it had knocked many branches off before, but it began moving, like rocks hitting the metal. All you heard was snap, clank, snap, clank, as whatever it was too tall to move under the branches, hitting the roof and trailer. At this point, my dad stopped, intending to exit the cabin and see the commotion for himself. Then came the most horrific thing I've ever seen in my life. Even now, as I share this. Grizzled, dark hair, gingerly black like it was burnt, long round snout like a donkey, but with bulldog-like teeth, fangs peeking from its lips. Its claws were just that, long finger-like appendages that ended in sharp, almost metallic-looking talons that scratched across our windshield. Hanging from each arm was a long flap of skin connected to its barrel-shaped chest as it slithered across our hood. If I had to guess a length and width, I'd say it was about as big as a professional basketball player, probably around 200 or so pounds. Its eyes weren't glowing like most would say, but in the light of our cabin, They reflected like that of a cat's eyes. It had next to no ears, just a flat head, except for two curled growths on its head, like filed-down antlers, dull and short. As it stared into our truck, its nose flared and exhaled deeply, its breath fogging up the glass before it slithered back up. The clanking noises returning as it climbed over the truck itself, hitting the roof of the trailer, its tail coming up and lashing about. The tail was long and reptilian, dark gray with a tuft of mangy hair on its tip, thin and large at the same time. It lashed out sideways, swooping off the hood before smashing into the side of the truck. I've been in plenty of car-on-car accidents, and I can tell you honestly that when you're in a vehicle that is rocking back and forth on two wheels, it's not pretty. As we landed back down on our left side, the tail swooped out again, with just as much force, shattering my father's window. Never before have I seen a 50-year-old man nearly soil himself. The creature must have reached the back of the trailer. I started feeling as if we were tipping backwards before a loud screech ripped through the air. Honestly, if anyone has ever heard a bat squeak, imagine it amplified and drawn out. Just as I was about to break down in a panic, a loud ripping noise followed, a series of loud clanks as its claws dug through the back of the truck. This was met by the truck jerking violently back and forth, the sound of heavy breathing in our ears as it climbed in the trailer, and a lurch as it climbed out. Finally, the sounds of branches snapping and a quickly fading flap, 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 as wings flew off into the night. We sat there in silence. We were scared to death. Our truck just sat there as we stared at the dimly lit dirt path before us, partially unsure of what happened, half expecting the thing to return, and half not believing what actually happened. After 10 minutes of sitting and cold sweat, we started the engine and drove to the yard another 2 hours. And the entire way there, we were silent. We told Saul about the dragon, but he wrote it off quickly as backwood freaks trying to rob us for food. We did discover a whole crate was busted open at the lock, the door as well hanging on a hinge, but was discovered by a cop who had pulled us over halfway there. Growing up in Jersey, you always hear stories of the devil, the old legend of the Lees family, or the tale of the King of Spain, the joke about the man and the kangaroo. But most only believe them as stories, nothing more. But that night, looking into the snorting nostrils and hearing that blood-curdling scream, I was convinced that the devil is no myth. Perhaps they're right. New Jersey really is a portal to hell.
Every year on every summer, I used to go camping with my dad. I can't remember the name of the area because it was a long time ago. It was the 7th of August, the date we always go camping. In 2001, we had arrived at our spot. It was right next to a glistening lake. The lake itself was huge, and my dad told stories of a monster living near the lake that preyed upon unlucky campers like us. I never believed him until that day. We had set up our tents for the night because it was going to get dark soon and we needed a place to sleep. Before I continue, I just want to tell you who was there. There was me and my dad, of course, and 2 of my uncles and a friend, Mike. That isn't his real name, but I'm just protecting it for privacy. The sun was about to set, so Mike and I went on a walk before the day was over. Mike was afraid of everything, so as I walked, I teased him with stories of the creature in the lake. We were so caught up in our stories that we hadn't realized how far we had went from camp. We turned and began to walk back. We had been walking for so long that the sun had begun to set, and it got very dark, very fast. I was walking ever so slightly ahead of Mike because I had a flashlight. "You okay, Mike?" I said, turning round. There was no answer. As I pointed the flashlight in his direction, I saw Mike standing there, his face white as snow. Then, a foul stench hit my nose, the stench of rotting. I walked over to him. He was shaking like crazy. I whispered to him, "What is it?" I told him. He lifted his hand slowly and pointed into a gap in the trees. I saw a deer standing there. A deer is usual around here. "Let's go," I said, trying to calm him. I aimed my flashlight at it. It looked at me, and I saw it clearly. Its head was a deer with a bloody mouth, and beside it was a rotting corpse. It stood up. It let out a chilling screech. It was humanoid, with 5 long claws on each hand. Its tongue was long and pointed, almost like a worm. Its body was slender and a brownish color. I let out a blood-curdling scream before tossing my flashlight at it and grabbing Mike and running. I never ran faster in my life. What took an hour to walk, I ran the way back in moments. Me and Mike never slept that night, and all through the night we couldn't help but think we were being watched. I don't know if I was just hallucinating from the terror, but I swear I hear the sound of long claws on wood whenever I'm near those woods. I'm never returning to that place again. Even when I'm close to those woods, it's as if the wind itself whispers what we believe we saw. Wendigo. Back in the day, I used to run 4-wheeler trails out at my grandma's place. She had dozens of old trails and a few acres beyond our elm. It was absolutely wild driving my Polaris through there, especially after it rained or on full moon nights. When the moon was full, you could see everything, and driving at night was always fun. Now, I know it sounds cheesy, but I highly doubt the full moon had anything to do with this story. I just had to say it because that's one of my favorite times to ride, and it happened to be a full moon the night this happened. I was driving down a stretch of trail that's sort of out in the open. To my right was a steep ditch that led into the woods, but to my left there was a field encircled by a barbed wire fence. I was driving down this trail, just enjoying the breeze. I closed my eyes for a moment. Never close your eyes while driving anything. In that second, I ran into something on the road, and I heard this deep, guttural whining, like a huge dog had just gotten hurt. I was jolted back to reality. I slowed down for a moment and looked behind me to see what it was that I hit. This huge mass of black fur was just pulling itself back up. I thought to myself, "Holy crap, I just hit a bear." I was about to floor it out of there, but I was paralyzed as I watched the animal stand up. It towered over me, sitting on the 4-wheeler by at least 3 feet. Before I could even assume it was a black bear, its skinny, muscular frame said otherwise. Its snout was way too long, and was at that moment my mind said, "Werewolf." I pushed on the gas and flew out of there. I looked behind me, and the beast was chasing after me. Luckily, I was slowly getting ahead of it. When I finally lost track of it, I was only more scared. I had no idea where it might have been. It could have popped up anywhere at any time. I was jumping off that Polaris before it even stopped under the awning. I ran inside my grandma's house and stayed up watching TV all night. I wasn't really watching, but I was just hoping that there was nothing looking in at me through those big windows. Ever since I could remember, I've loved hunting. Squirrels, deer. It all started as something my father and I did together. But when he died, I couldn't help but see myself out there more and more. It was his favorite thing, and I was lucky enough to be a part of it with him. God knows I miss him. After this experience, though, I'm scared to head back to those woods. It was a snowy Saturday morning. The sun had just come up. That day I had been hunting squirrels, but the woods were deathly quiet and still. I sat silently under the skeleton of an old oak tree. Whether or not I saw or killed anything really didn't matter. The best part was the beauty. Waking up early and soaking all of it in, it was worth every second of the quiet and the cold. Everything was suddenly stirred to life by a gruff, grunting sound. The noise was similar to a buck call, but so much lower and rough. At first, I thought a massive buck was dying in the snow. Then, it came again, but close enough to make my blood run cold. Whatever it was wasn't dying. It had moved an impossible amount of distance within those few seconds. I honestly had no idea what I was hearing. I did the only thing I could do. I sat still and tried not to breathe. Only moments later, I saw something that has changed my life in the worst possible way. The head of a deer, with a sickly look and eyes with way too much white, appeared from behind a tree 15 yards in front of me. It was motionless. Worst of all, the damn thing was about 9 feet off the ground. I've never seen any deer that tall, and this thing looked like it had just been in a fight and diseased by some unknown plague. It wasn't a pretty sight. But when a clawed hand appeared just below it, I knew that this was no deer. It sounds like something out of a children's book of scary stories, I know, but I wish that's all it was. These bony fingers curved around the trunk of the tree, disgusting nails sliding along the bark. The way its head was angled, it was as if it was staring at me. Instinct took over. I grabbed my gun and ran as quickly as possible back to my truck. I had never run so fast in my life, but somehow I still ran faster when I heard that grunting again. Closer and closer it seemed to come, no matter how far I ran from that place. When I reached my truck, I opened and slammed the door shut. I started it and floored the damn thing. But before I really took off, I made one mistake. I glanced into the woods, as if it had been copied and pasted. That thing's decaying head and clawed hand were now protruding from behind a pine tree at the forest's edge. I'm sorry, Dad, but I don't know if I'll ever be going back there.